Say amen. That was awesome.
Yes, yeah. Wait for this.
I think your line's working.
That's.
So I'll just give you mine.
Hey, good morning. Sorry, we had a little technical difficulties this morning, but we're up and running now. It is my pleasure to present this morning the Bozak clan, John and Jenny, and Stephanie, and her two children are over there. Wave over. There you go. They're one of them. And Colleen in the back with Arabella, and she'll be up when it's her turn this evening. Jenny grew up in the church. Their daughters grew up in the church after a stint in Georgia. Sorry, I'm supposed to be speaking in this, and have come back. John, where did you grow up? Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. There you go. So thank you for being here. I've got to run across the street to preach, so Gwinnett is going to wrap everything up. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. It feels extremely difficult to sit in front of you today and talk about religion. I've never been comfortable speaking in public, and I've never really been comfortable talking about religion either. So this is combining two things that are kind of difficult for me. I guess I really am one of the frozen chosen, as Presbyterians are often called. I had a friend in college that actually made me question my own reserve when it came time to talking about religious matters. He felt very strongly that we should be spreading the good news of Christ's salvation as far and wide as we possibly could. And I think he felt very strongly about, converting people to Christianity. This always made me a little bit uncomfortable, even though I never said so. I've never wanted to force my views on anyone ever. And I was uncomfortable even speaking about it because that felt like forcing my views on someone else. But I think he had a point in a way. Even if I don't believe that there is one right way, and I never will, I have gotten a lot of comfort in my darkest moments from religion. And in some of the toughest times in my life, my faith has kind of pulled me through it. And so even if I don't want to force others to believe what I believe, I think it still makes sense to talk about it and share my experiences, because maybe someone could benefit from the same things I have, even if it's something that makes me uncomfortable, which it does. Even so, even after making that decision, I think religion is still something that's hard to articulate. It's not something you write about, or at least it's not for me. I think it's a feeling. It's the comfort of going to service every Sunday. It's the beauty and poetry of the Psalms. It's the music of my favorite hymns. My life can get hectic. I have 2 kids and I work full time, sometimes more than full time, a lot of times more than full time. And I can get wrapped up in the wrong things, like how many carbs I ate yesterday, or overanalyzing how a meeting at work went. And I think that for me, every time I go to church, it's a reset button. All the things during the week that didn't really matter, the obsession over carbs or work or the outfit or my hair, they just kind of fade and they disappear when I sit in a service. And I'm reminded of the things that do matter. My family, my many blessings, my mom, my dad, my kids, my sister, my brand new niece, all the church family that I've grown to love, singing in the church with Jane and Rosemary and Barbara and Julie and all the people that have just meant so much to my life. I've been singing in the choir since I was 12. So the church choir really is my second family. I grew up with them. I don't think I ever would have learned to sing alto if it wasn't for Jane sitting beside me. And I think it's my time at church to be mindful, to count my many blessings, to think about the things I could be doing to help others, to remember to forgive, to remember to ask for forgiveness. I want that blessing for my children. I want them to have a family like I've had, to grow up in a church the way I have, and to have a community that extends just beyond the people you see sitting here. So I think it was worth talking about. But to me, these things define my faith, my church, my religion. And that just kind of emphasizes for me everything that church is and what it means to be religious. It's a feeling. It's not a written word for me, at least.
Okay, so John Ryan sent us materials that, to read and helping us consider what we would say today. And I was very impressed with what he sent by the bravery of St. Augustine, who perhaps was the first person to write a spiritual autobiography. And he wrote very intimately about his life and shared a great deal of detail. So while I definitely admire how St. Augustine opened himself up to others by writing the way he did, I do not feel at ease myself doing the same. My life, like anyone's, is wrapped up and tangled up in the lives of so many other people. And the details of my journey would potentially expose details of other people's lives that they perhaps would not choose to share. To add to this dilemma of what to share and what not to share, I grew up here in Davidson and started coming to DCPC when I was 4 years old, which is both a blessing and a complication. Ever since I accepted John's invitation to participate in this Speaking of Our Faith, I have been struggling with how to share my faith journey in a way that only offers hope and healing without sharing in a way that causes injury to anyone else. And that brings me to my point. My faith journey is centered around 3 words: hope, healing, and prayer. And also around these 3 pieces then, which for me, hope and healing and prayer. Let me say now that I know without question that God is. And I know this because at the absolute darkest moments of my life, my prayers to God were always answered. The hubris on my part of making that statement is not lost on me. Why would God answer my pathetic cry for help and yet seem to possibly ignore others' much more worthy cries. I do not believe I am at all more worthy than any other life that exists. I am not more worthy than the grasses or trees or ants or aardvarks, yet I do feel I am the direct beneficiary of miracles. And I will try with my limited vocabulary and religious education to explain, and we'll start at my real beginning, which is my earliest memories. And they begin with my family's move to Davidson. I cannot say how old I was when I was taught to say a bedtime prayer every night, but I very clearly remember the prayer, which is, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. God be with me through the night and wake me with the morning light." And then I was taught to add to that, "God bless Mommy and Daddy, Kathy and Bert." And then when I was 5, Carrie Ann, "and all my relatives and friends, and help me to be a good little girl in every way. Amen." Before my sister Carrie Ann was born, I was perhaps 4 or 5 years old, I had a terrifying dream that was so disturbing and so violent, it woke me up. And I can remember that night in my life absolutely clearly, even now. Every night after that one, I added to my bedtime prayer, beseeching God to not let me have bad dreams ever again. And isn't that sort of a silly story? A child has a nightmare, so prays to God to please never let bad dreams occur again. I literally begged God to help me to protect my mind from bad dreams starting when I was 4 or 5 years old, and God answered my prayer. I religiously prayed. Yeah, okay. I religiously prayed that almost every night. And as I grew up, and once when I was maybe 10 and very sick, I fell asleep without praying and dreamed thousands of insects were crawling all over me in my bed. I woke up in a panic and realized I had fallen asleep without praying. As I look back and examine my life, I have wondered why I, at such a young age, dared to believe I could ask anything of a God that was represented to me as imposing, stern, a deity that I was not worthy of. And I find the answer in this passage I was taught very, very young in Sunday school, which was, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." John 3:16. This little New Testament was given to me by someone at my birth, and I loved it. And what's interesting is when I went to go write this down, I found that the page was folded down. So at some point, and I don't remember when, I folded the page down for that particular passage. I had that memorized, that passage, when I was so completely terrified as a young child. But my memorization skills being what they were then and still are today, it was the first 6 words that I actually really remembered. For God so loved the world. God so loved the world. If those words were true, and to a 4-year-old, didn't they have to be true, right? Because they were written in the Bible and you were supposed to memorize them, then didn't that mean that God did love me? And I was brave enough to ask God to help me because God loved me. Years later, I reached the very darkest point of my life. And in that moment, all I could think was, God, help me. Even now, those words have the same impact on me that they did at that moment as I silently begged them. Peace fills my soul. I know everything will be okay in the end. I am freed to offer my pain and burdens to God and know that I am as loved as the birds of the sky. I feel silly telling this, as if somehow I am playing a parlor game, a magic trick. Look, just say the words, God help me, and voila, instant peace. I think it sounds a little crazy. But at the darkest hour of my existence, the peace of God that definitely surpasses all understanding filled my soul. And I found peace. I just knew that everything would be okay. God is with me. To this day, I know that all I have to do is reach out to God and I can feel that love. It was a miracle. It is a miracle that has stayed with me ever since. As Peter just said in his last sermon, ain't nobody in this room alone. Which brings me to my second piece of writing that is such an important part of my faith journey. Cold Sassy Tree by Olive Ann Burns, and it's a wonderful book that I highly recommend. But at the time that I read it, this passage jumped out at me, and it perfectly stated the miracle that I experienced. The character Grandpa Rucker is talking to his wife about prayer and what Jesus meant when he said, "Ask and ye shall receive." Grandpa says, when Jesus says ask and you'll get it, he was saying that if you get beat down, scared to death you can't do what you got to, or scared you're going to die, or scared folks won't like you, why all you got to do is put your hand in God's and he'll lift you up. I know it for a fact, love. I can pray, Lord, help me not be scared, and I don't know how, but it's like an eraser wipes the fears away. Reading those words when I did in 1986 seemed like another miracle for me because it perfectly described my experience with praying for God's help at that very darkest moment years ago. Having said this, I want to add that we each are unique individuals who will have experiences in our lives that are completely unique. My relationship with God, my experience with prayer is part of my faith journey. I can only repeat, I am not more special or more deserving of God's love or peace than any other, just that God has given me that gift in this way. And so I will jump forward in my faith journey to a closer time when I found myself once more overwhelmed with pain and anger. Almost 10 years ago, maybe 2 weeks before Easter, I was floundering. I believe most of us appreciate that anger actually really hurts the one who's angry the most. I knew that then, but I was really struggling with the emotion. I prayed for the peace of God to fill me, to take away my anger, to get me to offer forgiveness even if none was being asked for. And those prayers were not working. Any peace I felt seemed to evaporate as anger overwhelmed me again and again. I wanted revenge. I wanted the Old Testament, an eye for an eye, not Christianity. But this man, who has been one of the greatest gifts I have received from God, along with my daughters, my sister Carrie Ann, my grandchildren, he had just read The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, and he offered it to me. And what I read was this: like a procession, you walk together towards your God self. You are the way and the wayfarers. And when one of you falls down, he falls for those behind him, a caution against the stumbling stone. And he falls for those ahead of him, who though faster and surer of foot, yet fail to remove the stumbling stone. And once again, I received the miracle of God's peace. I understood in reading those words that I owed the person toward whom I felt such anger. I was being shown the stones on the path. So I recognize that my faith story sounds pretty selfish. I think all the pronouns I have used have been personal. However, I do appreciate that I have been given so very much and that I owe a debt I can never repay. I'm grateful to Davidson College Presbyterian Church and also St. James Episcopal in Marietta, Georgia, because for both of those churches in particular, they provided me with communities of people who have offered me lifelines along my way and given me so much that I hope in some way I can possibly return.
Is this working? There, that's working, right? And so first, Larry, I have to apologize to you because John gave me my own mic, and within 2 minutes I broke it. So my apologies. It was a freak accident, really. And also, first, I have to admit, like Stephanie did, that I'm uncomfortable sharing my faith journey, uncomfortable speaking in front of everyone. And I think I can best describe my unease by paraphrasing Proverbs chapter 17, verse 28.
Better to remain silent and thought the fool than to speak and leave no doubt. The actual quote is, even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. With that in mind, I hope not to make a fool of myself this morning. My faith journey begins, as I suspect most do, as a child. My parents were devout Catholics who wanted to pass on their faith to their children. As it turned out, and in spite of their best efforts, it didn't have the desired effect. Out of 10 children, not one remained in the Catholic Church, and one is an atheist. It's not their fault. We were all sent to Catholic school for 12 years. And during that time, we became intimately aware of what Catholicism was really about. While today's news highlights child molestation by Catholic clergy, the unspoken truth was physical abuse by priests, nuns, and lay teachers in the Catholic school system. Spare the rod and spoil the child was the general rule. From those formative years in the Catholic Church, I came to understand that Catholicism was more about appearance over substance, more about fear and retribution rather than love and acceptance. I think the gangsters movies like The Godfather and that ilk portray it pretty accurately. On the way to mass or baptism or whatever, they assassinate a rival gang member. Afterwards, they go to confession and all is forgiven. Repeat. Let me be clear, I have not committed any crimes, but I have sinned. And in the Catholic Church, almost every transgression, like missing Mass on Sunday, is a mortal sin, condemning one to eternal fires of hell. An eternity is a long time. As late comedian George Carlin said, a nun described eternity to him. It's a tiny bird that comes once a year to sharpen its beak on a 1,000-foot mountain of pure granite. The time it takes to wear that mountain down to the grain of sand small enough to fit through the eye of a needle. That's 1 second in eternity. As a child, the thought of burning in hell for eternity was horrifying. But tradition, custom, and habit kept me a member of the Catholic Church for a long time, but not very committed. Then too, life with children and climbing the career ladder and made it difficult to sustain a commitment to the church. And add to the stress, divorce. The narrator in Dante's The Divine Comedy talks about finding himself lost in a dark forest, unable to move forward. That's a good description of how I felt at this point in my life. The turning point in my journey began with my wife, Jenny. With her help, I started to examine the role of religion and how it would play out in my life. I looked more closely at the Catholic Church stance on a number of important issues and decided it was not in line with my philosophy, or for that matter, the teachings of Jesus. I was looking for an inclusive, accepting, non-judgmental, and loving religion that stressed mission and reached out to all those less fortunate. We joined the St. James Episcopal Church while living in Atlanta. I call it Catholic Light, all the ceremony without the guilt. When we came to Charlotte, we searched for a church that felt comfortable and synced with our spiritual philosophy. We were looking for the Goldilocks church, one that was just right for us. And we found it here at DCPC. It's been a long journey with peaks and valleys, challenges, failures, and yes, some successes. I feel blessed to be part of a loving, inclusive, mission-oriented church at DCPC. I'm still climbing the spiritual mountain, trying to be a child of God, sharing his love in the world. With your help, I hope to continue my faith journey.
All right, is this one? Nope. It's on. Yeah. All right, now, there we go. Okay. Before I begin, I want to share a bit of background. I gave birth to my daughter Arabella in January of this year. Becoming a parent was a monumental part of my faith journey. It also made me consider the role that my family had in my faith journey and the lessons that they taught me. Today, I'm choosing to share a piece of my faith story through a letter written to my daughter. Keep in mind that if I were to cover my full journey, it would include so much more. I might talk about this church and congregation, about discussions with friends, about going to school and growing up, about meeting my husband. Needless to say, we'd be here much longer and we just don't have time for that. So with that, I'll get started. Dear Arabella, I feel so lucky, so grateful to have you, to get to watch you learn and grow. Your arrival to this world was both exciting and incredibly nerve-wracking. After a couple years hoping for you, I finally got a positive pregnancy test on Mother's Day, and your father and I were ecstatic. But Arabella, while I couldn't wait to meet you, I also knew the world was not the perfect place I wanted it to be for your arrival. A pandemic raged, a tumultuous election cycle had begun. The impacts of climate change were ever more apparent. Systemic racism continued, the list goes on. And yet, your impending arrival brought hope. It was a reminder to me of God's love for the world. In the month leading up to your birth, I worked relentlessly to ensure I made a safe haven for you. But life had other plans. After a very easy pregnancy, I was sent to the hospital to be induced as the doctors worried for my health after your due date passed. Then, despite the precautions I had taken, I tested positive for COVID while at the hospital awaiting your arrival. Arabella, I've never been so scared, not for myself, but for you. And in that moment, I did the only two things I could. I prayed and I sang. For as long as I can remember, I've been part of a family that believes in prayer. One of my earliest memories was gathering around the dinner table each night and saying grace. We'd bow our heads, hold hands, and I'm going to make my family join me once more as we pray. Bless us, O Lord, for these thy gifts, which we're about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen. Arabella, I'll admit I didn't understand all the words, and sometimes the prayer sounded like one long word to me. But I always knew to be thankful for the gifts I had received, and I had received so many gifts. I grew up in a loving family who supported me through everything. They supported me when I wanted to be an opera singer at the age of 2, mind you. Despite not being able to carry a tune, they encouraged me as I joined choirs. They supported me when I was painfully shy and couldn't go to my confirmation class alone. They were supportive of me no matter what I did, celebrating my joys, encouraging me when I was low, mourning with me when I was sad. I hope to provide the same type of childhood for you that I received. However, as I grew up, I became increasingly more aware that not everyone is as lucky as I was to have such a loving home. I told you music was important to me, and hymns helped me to understand my calling. One hymn always stands out. Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. After college, I felt that I was being called to join Teach for America, a program that places non-education majors in low-income communities to teach. And so I moved to Baltimore to teach math at an inner-city high school. Arabella, this was a very formative time in my faith journey. I saw firsthand how God is there even in difficult situations. I heard my calling to help my students. I grew to love my community and my students, and I heard my calling to help them. I wanted nothing more than to take their pain away and give them peace and hope. I can look back now and say I did provide a safe haven for my students, but after 2 years in Baltimore, I felt consumed by disappointment in myself. My students faced so many challenges that I could not help them overcome. In those times, I didn't doubt that there is a God. When I looked at all there was to do, I felt strongly that I was not living up to my calling. In my mind, I had failed. I will go, Lord, if you lead me.
That song felt like a lie now because I couldn't go on. I felt like I'd been given every opportunity and I should be making the world a better place, but I wasn't. My sweet daughter, I have learned since then that God's calling in that moment wasn't for me to take the weight of the world on my shoulders. That was never what that hymn meant. I told you how lucky I am to have my family. God's love touched me again through them. Witnessing the decline of my mental health, your Evie, my mom, came and retrieved me from Baltimore. As we drove home to North Carolina, your Aunt Stessie went into labor with your cousin Philip, who has also brought so much joy to this world. And despite having so much to think about for herself, she continued to ask about me. And when we pulled in the driveway back home, your Geeky, my dad, was waiting and had put out a big sign welcoming me home. They were all there for me and supportive of me when I felt I had failed the most. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. God was leading me home and back to the reminder that love is there for us always. That's the thing about God's love. It's all surrounding. You don't have to do anything to deserve it. It's just there. So when we pray and when we sing, we spread God's love. And we can spread God's love in so many ways. Through a smile, through listening to others, through art. We spread love through trying our hardest to tackle all problems, big and small. And whether we fail or succeed, it is the love we share that sustains us. So back to your birth, I prayed and I sang. Often I find singing is just another form of prayer. God is always watching over you. God is watching you with loving eyes. God is hearing you in all your prayers. God is listening with tender, loving ears. God shines light in every dark and fearful place we go, and will answer every little cry that we make. So wherever you may go, follow in God's holy way, and trust God to take you home. And then you were born. And I felt that love wash over me all over again. God did, in fact, take me home. Arabella, whether your journey be easy, difficult, mundane, know that I will always love you. God and peace are always there for you. And know that we all stumble, but are still worthy of love. Trust God to take you home. With love, always, your mom.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. Are there questions that people have for the Bozak family?
So
Joe?
when you tell me the story, but when you came back, you were in Atlanta for a while, did Shanta, and then you came to Charlotte. So was there then, you didn't initially come to DCTC? And how did that come to?
So the question is, when you came from Atlanta, how did the journey lead you to DCPC when you came to Charlotte?
Okay. So let me start by saying that when I got to leave the Davidson area, I was very much in a mode of, I want to get out of Peyton Place. You know, so as adults, we see all the things that are fabulous about this small town, this community, this county, this state. But as somebody who grew up here and then as a teenager was living here, it's like, no, I need to get out. So John and I actually worked on the process of becoming Catholic. And through that process felt like, actually, I am not Catholic. It does not fit with my belief system. And so we, in searching for what would be a home for us, found the Episcopal Church, which we loved. I mean, it was wonderful and just a fabulous experience. As a matter of fact, the girls were baptized Catholic, confirmed Presbyterian. So when we came back in '97 to North Carolina with the girls, we really were looking for the Episcopal Church. And the one in Huntersville is so small, I feel guilty to confess it was too small. I felt like there weren't going to be children for our children to interact with, and not a big enough community. And I know one way that you grow a community is to be a part of it, but I'm ashamed to say I felt it was too big a haul to make. In the meantime, we were still coming because Carrie Ann was here at DCPC. So we were still, interacting with the church, and I never felt like I wanted to push John to go to my childhood church. And he actually made the decision, said, you know what, it's a fit. So you want to say anything? That's good. No.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Wayne.
John, how did you get so involved in that? I know that's probably your first, but how did you get involved in that?
So, just a second, John, let me repeat the question so people can hear. And that is, how did your journey lead you to work with Habitat?
I actually started with Habitat when we were in Atlanta. And it was early on in the Habitat formation, I think, because they didn't do anything the way they do it now. I mean, they didn't have cranes that brought in the roofing trusses and all that. You had to do that by hand. And that's a big job. But anyway, I started there going to Habitat. And then when I came back here, I started asking the church to do a Habitat build. And we started, actually, Jenny and I were on the committee to do the first Habitat build here. And then we continued, I was on community missions, and I continued to stress Habitat involvement. And so that's where we are today. We do a Habitat house or participate in one every year. So I hope that answers your question.
And I'll just add, one of the things we really liked, so we literally constructed these houses, but there was also, so we were able to bring the girls, we supply food. And at the time, they weren't as strict about you have to be 16 years old to be on the premises. Then they allowed our very young children to come and bring food, and, you make sandwiches and lunch for everybody and provide that. And so we were able to do that with the girls too. So we just really liked it as a whole family way of offering our service.
Thank you. Sure. Exactly. Are there any other questions? If not, I would love to thank you all for your time this morning, for talking about your journey. It means so much to us, other people's journey. And I thank all of you for coming. They're asking that all of us leave the sanctuary. They're going to disinfect. So even if you're attending worship at 11, they're asking that we all exit so that they'll have time to disinfect a little bit. So I thank you all for your time this morning and for coming and making this possible. So thank you.